Hello everybody, Jazzy here. Welcome to another Don't Starve Together recap video. I have been playing a ton in the new beta of DST, which adds skill trees to 3 characters, Walter, Wortox, and Wendy. Now, I do want to check out all 3, but I was especially interested in Wendy, one of the original cast of Don't Starve, who hasn't received any big updates since their rework almost 5 years ago. Wendy is one of those characters that I've always loved to do a proper run with in DST, but just never got around to doing. Her character is so compatible with my playstyle, and I've always held Wendy mains in high esteem. This one's for you, Sam. So on the eve of her skill tree, I figured I should do a run with her and Abigail. But not just any old run. This will be in Lights Out. If you've been around my channel from the beginning, you may recall that my first video series ever was a Wendy Lights Out run in Don't Starve. 6 years ago! So let's call this a well-timed throwback and also maybe an opportunity to commentate this one a little bit better. I should note that I'm making this video in the beta and have been playing this game of trying to keep up with the changes that have already been made since I finished the run. Thank you for your patience. Hopefully most of the big changes are at least mentioned here, but I'll also try and keep a pinned comment updated as more changes get made. Now, I'll speak a bit in a minute about why I love Lights Out for Wendy. But first, let's talk about my skill tree choices to start this run. First, we're going to go with the Lunar Affinity skills. This will unlock a potion that buffs Abby's attacks, as well as a Gestalt version of Abigail, which should be more resilient in certain boss fights. I'm picking all 3 Morning Glory skills, which will make gathering them for potions a lot faster. We also want this Wraith's Wreath skill, which will allow Wendy to drink some of Abigail's potions for some interesting effects, one of which will be utilized a lot in this run. We definitely want the Elixir Basket so that we can carry all our potions in a single inventory slot. I'm also going to get all 3 of the sisturn skills, and I'm especially interested in Sisturn 3, which gives Abigail a sort of damage reduction in boss fights. We'll see how effective that plays out. I'm going to take the first 2 Abigail skills, unlocking 2 commands which can be used to more easily maneuver Abigail around in fights. Lastly, I want the skill to be able to relocate gravestones so that I can assist pipspooks conveniently from my base. Now let's talk about Lights Out and why I consider Wendy one of the best picks for this game mode. Lights Out is basically a world with all night. No dusk or daytime ever. I've made a video guide on all the unexpected benefits to playing in this mode, but there are also advantages unique to certain characters, and Wendy happens to have 3 big ones. The first benefit is that Wendy loses less sanity during dusk at night, and as a result will be less likely to have to constantly fight nightmare creatures. The second benefit is specific to Abigail, who does varying damage depending on the time of day. In Lights Out, Abigail will always do her maximum damage because it is always nighttime. So that's 40 damage from normal Abby and 250 from Gestalt Abby. That means we don't need to time the start of fights to catch Abigail at her strongest. And with a little help, regular Abigail will be able to handle pretty much any size hound wave or clear any amount of spiders, bees, or frogs, so that's a plus. The final benefit, and probably the main reason why I chose Lights Out for Wendy, is her Wreath skill, which lets her benefit from drinking potions as long as she wears the wreath. Most of these potions have nominal effects. Many, I'm sorry to say, are practically useless, but there is one potion that is going to be important to us. The Nightshade Nostrum. When Wendy drinks one of these, she gets night vision for 6 minutes. To be able to craft a bunch of these in Lights Out means we will have less light management to worry about, especially when we are much less reliant on fuel for lanterns and miner hats. So let's jump into day 1 with Wendy and Abigail, and I'll talk you through the entire progression, from First Autumn all the way to the opening of both rifts and defeat of every boss in the Constant. Hope you enjoyed the recap. Let's get started. My first set of goals is to tech up for some decent light sources, grab some gravestones to set up at a base, assist some pipspooks for Morning Glory, and start taming a beefalo. The pipspook side quest has been improved considerably with the skill tree. Because of these 3 skills, there are more toys to find, they tend to be closer together, and you are rewarded with many more Morning Glories. Getting 18 to 20 from a single pipspook is a considerable time savings, and I'm thankful for these QOL improvements that the skill trees bring. Since I recorded this run, they changed the gravestone skill slightly so that now instead of using a shovel to relocate graves, you have to craft these items that let you transfer the spirit to a new grave. And these items require ash and, I believe, broken shells. What this means is that I wouldn't relocate the graves quite as early in the run. I would probably save that until after coming back from the ruins to bully, a couple of slurtles, and then bring the broken shells back upstairs to relocate gravestones. As soon as I spot the beefalo, I'm dropping down an alchemy engine and making a bell so that I can bond a beefalo and start to tame it. Then as soon as I get the mats for a saddle, I can start the process of saddling. This is a true struggle in Lights Out. Basically, you have to walk the bell away from the beefalo and then try feeding it before it falls back asleep. This usually takes a few tries, but once you get the saddle on, you're good as long as it doesn't shake it, which doesn't happen that often in Lights Out. Until the day I die, I will never understand why I can control attack a bonded beefalo. This doesn't happen with Glommer or Chester. Why are bonded beefalo not considered followers? Anyways, day 5, Wendy makes her first wreath and a handful of nightshade nostrums. Abigail has no use for this potion since she's always doing nighttime damage, but Wendy will enjoy every last drop of night vision. Another great thing about the wreath is that it grants enough passive sanity to completely cancel the drain of night while Wendy is wearing it. So for the early days, we will enjoy some casual Lights Out exploration with no shadow creatures and a full view of our surroundings. I'm also going to make Wendy's picnic casket, which is very cheap and will allow Wendy to carry all of her different potions inside a container. There's not much to say about this. It's just a straight inventory upgrade and will free up tons of space. I'll probably still keep healing elixirs out of the basket for boss fights. The first boss we will fight is Bee Queen, for which I will need a little bit of healing. Normally I'd go for pierogies, but getting a bird in Lights Out is a big production, so I'm going with what I have on hand and cooking up a bit of trail mix. For Bee Queen, I'm going to give Abigail a single Revenant Restorative, and she should be fine. The idea here is to face tank the boss while Abigail aggros and kills the Grumblebees. If there's time when Bee Queen flies away, I can help her take care of Grumblebees, but generally I want to be attacking the boss as much as possible. With Abby's Vex buff, Wendy will be doing Dark Sword damage with a Hambat, so the fight doesn't usually take that long. My marble armor will provide that big damage reduction, and beekeeper hats will soak up some of the durability loss, so the marble will last much longer. In total, the fight cost us 3 marble suits, 3 beekeeper hats, 1 revenant restorative, and 7 trail mix. The next boss up is Eye of Terror. Lights Out provides a very nice eternal night for fighting the eyeball bosses at any time, and for however long you need. It does feel pretty nice doing 52 damage with an undomesticated beefalo. One of the most amazing perks about Wendy is that her negative damage modifier doesn't affect her beefalo, but Abby's Vex damage modifiers do, and it treats the beefalo as Wendy for that purpose. This results in an extra 53% in physical damage. The only other character that can boost a beefalo damage is Warley, and for someone like me who loves fighting with the beefalo, it's hard to pass up on this kind of opportunity. Now, I didn't need to do this fight without any armor, but it probably would have been fine to run away and remount if I hadn't left the beefalo bell on the ground right next to the boss. Wendy took a direct unarmored hit and was suddenly 1 hit away from a dead run. Since the beefalo aggroed onto the boss, I decided to run away with the bell in order to unload the beefalo and get him back to me. If this were the twins, it would have been over instantly. You wouldn't believe it by watching my reckless treatment of this animal, but generally, I am taking my time with this one. Just backing off and healing Abby when necessary and remounting the beefalo every minute or so. These fights are kind of tricky for keeping Abby alive, but if I can keep the eye aggroed on me, with Abby trailing behind at a close distance, I could typically keep her safe. It's just another thing to keep track of in the heat of battle. Day 16, I'm doing my late autumn ruins visit, mainly to make a couple of star staves so that I can do the Moonstone event and keep warm in winter. Both Abigail and an unmounted beefalo are very vulnerable to rooks, so I'm moving slowly, just trying to avoid aggroing too many clockworks. That said, we are going to lean heavily on the beefalo during the nightmare phase because Abigail won't help out at all. No Vex buff means Wendy is pulling off West damage versus nightmares. I'm honestly surprised that the skill tree didn't add any better ways for dealing with nightmares, but perhaps that was always meant to be an unavoidable downside to the character. Like, yeah, we got more sanity perks now, but that doesn't really help Wendy during the nightmare phase. On top of that, the beefalo is going to be less of a safe option once the cave rifts start, but I'm going to talk more about that later. Also, if you haven't met this guy yet, allow me to introduce the Lurking Nightmare. It spawns from nightmare lights and fissures and has more than twice the HP of other nightmares. I try to avoid it mostly because it takes forever to kill, it doesn't drop anything special, and you need cat-like reflexes to dodge the horn attack. Once the rifts are open, they'll drop pure horror, so I might fight a few then, but generally they just take way too long to kill. I found a broken station, and for the sake of time decided not to upgrade right away. I mostly want to make 2 star staves, a deconstruction staff, and a magiluminescence. I can craft all of that without upgrading. Of all the low HP mobs that Abigail absolutely shreds, monkeys are especially satisfying to mow down. Wendy's favorite food is banana pop, so this biome becomes a very easy source of nope. I'm still not making banana pop. I don't care. I'm not doing it. Even still, you can totally kill monkeys anytime you want. And if it's outside the nightmare phase, you just rile up Abby and she'll take care of absolutely everything. My beefalo finally poofed on day 29. It took longer because I spent a bit of time off the beefalo during the taming, not to mention starting kinda late. But now that I got a tamed beefalo, I want to get ready for the winter bosses. First up is Kloss. Now, with any Kloss fight, we want to take out the deer first. No, but that is what I'm going to do. I am going to enrage Kloss. Now you might be screaming, and this is normal. You see, I need a blue gem to make a moon dial to mutate Abigail, and for the life of me, I could not get a single blue gem from the ruins or from any of MacTusk hounds. So screw it, I will happily sacrifice a deer antler for a guaranteed blue gem. Absolutely. And after we mutate Abigail, we can come back and do the fight for real. It's actually a great method for getting a guaranteed blue gem in a pinch. And I'm thankful to Alint for reminding me of that. When Klopp spawns, I'm going to let it knock a few trees down and fight some tree guards. Unfortunately, this means that the tree guard gets the kill this time, but it's all good, the run is not dead. There will be plenty of deer clops fighting later on. What's really important is that we build our moon dial and use it to mutate Abigail into her gestalt form. This version of Abby is more of a sniper than a tank. It floats around enemies and occasionally shoots in for a burst of damage, and then it backs off again. DPS-wise, it's not the strongest possible version of Abby, but because of her kiting, I figured she would last longer in certain fights. Hopefully. I completely failed at the Moonstone event. It was a friendly reminder that I was a bit out of practice at the time. I probably hadn't played DST in over a month. Anyway, I'll get it right next full moon. We just have to wait 20 days for that. Gestalt Abby is great for Kloss. She gets her hits in while avoiding aggro on the deer. The spells will target her but don't seem to deal any damage. There's just usually one extra cast spell that I need to avoid. The deer will get an occasional hit in, but as long as I keep attacking Kloss, Abigail seems to keep my target consistently. I'm thankful for this design choice in her AI. It means I don't need to escape or maneuver her away too often as long as I stay active in the fight. With an ornery beefalo plus vex damage, we are headbutting for 77 damage, which is not too shabby, plus the occasional 250 from Abby. Once we get a damage boosting saddle and enlightened crown, this fight will go insanely fast. The loot was a Bee Queen crown and scaled furnace blueprint. Not the best, but not the worst. In spring, I will probably use the Nightshade Potion less often during heavy rains if I plan to use an Umbrella for protection. There are other options for rain, but I'm too lazy to make a raincoat, and besides that, I don't like losing the backpack, so I'll just rely on other light sources if the rain is too heavy for the wreath. I did dig out a couple of generic seeds from tumbleweeds, so I'm going to make a bird cage. To trap a bird, we're going to craft a bird trap and bait it with any seed. Now, this could be another generic from a tumbleweed or a gifted seed from a catcoon. Then we're going to unload the baited trap by walking far away. And then when we come back, there's a 50% chance that there will be a live bird in the trap. It's great that this works and lights out. Otherwise, we'd be forced to gamble twigs and petals with befriended catcoons for a very slim chance of a live bird. Day 38, we're fighting Dragonfly. Either version of Abby can be fine, but again, I'm thankful that I can keep the boss aggroed on me as long as I stay active in the fight. I probably should have prepared some healing food for the beefalo, but I'm fairly confident in my kiting skills, and I have an ice staff for avoiding the first attack. Every once in a while, D-Fly will target Abby, but usually misses her unless the swipe is perfectly timed. But then I just need to hit the boss before it attacks again. She even dodges the fire stomps when D-Fly enrages, which was the one part I was worried about. I will try to give Abby the killing blow as often as possible. This time she didn't give me a choice. On day 41, it's time for Moose Goose. This fight is much easier in Lights Out because both the Mosslings and the boss will constantly fall back asleep, leaving plenty of time to get in free hits and even kill all the Mosslings before they enrage. Gestalt Abby can even catch up to the Mosslings when they run away from Wendy, making it easier to dispatch them quickly. So it feels fitting that she also lands the killing blow on the boss. Because I went with lunar affinity skills, I will work on starting the lunar rifts first in this run. So in preparation for Pearl quests, I am making another quick trip back to the ruins to get the relic chair blueprint from the sitting horror. It's also a good time to fight Ancient Guardian. As with D-Fly, I'm trying to keep the boss's aggro on Wendy so that it doesn't charge Abby. For the most part, she dodged well enough. I did need to unsummon her during the second phase because the tentacles were starting to deal some serious damage. And once they start covering the arena, it's really tough keeping her safe from them. Unfortunately, Sisturn 3 is currently useless for this fight. Both the boss attacks and shadow tentacles hit Abby just as hard as they hit Wendy. This is why an ornery B-Flow is still such a powerful option for Wendy, because if Abigail does need to be unsummoned, it won't absolutely cripple Wendy's damage output. The loot was very nice. We got a Lazy Explorer, 3 greens, and plenty of thulecite. I'm going to use that to upgrade a pseudoscience station and do some crafting. First, I want a pickaxe for Nightmare Werepig, and then I'm going to use the rest of the thulecite to make 7 crowns. I will also bring back an extra green gem for Crab King. The rest of the gems we got from Dragonfly. Back home, I'm culling much of this beefalo herd. Now, I don't know if it's a placebo effect, but it's always felt like beefalo reproduce at an accelerated rate during Lights Out. Since I chose the Savannah to base for some reason, and the beefalo aren't going to help much for hound waves, I figured now is a good time to thin their numbers a bit, but I doubt it will make a difference for long. And remember, no matter if your beefalo is fully domesticated, if you attack a beefalo while mounted, your beefalo will rage at you the moment you dismount. And if Abigail is around, she'll start attacking your beefalo, so you want to unsummon her if you don't want your crew to tear each other apart. And now we're going to attempt the Moonstone again. I had to take out a few mobs that started targeting the walls, which caused Abby to attack some mobs as well. Gestalt Abby seems to have a slight advantage here because she won't automatically aggro every mob with her area of effect if you attack one of them. So as long as nothing is aggroed and Abby isn't riled up, she seems to behave herself. I prefer the pickaxe over the Bright Shade Smasher for clearing the Moonrock statues because you won't accidentally hammer a wall or structure with the action button. We are going to take advantage of 8 whole minutes of full moon and make a second Mooncaller staff. Normally you can't do this on day 51 because the night is not long enough, but this way I can deconstruct one for the archives and have an extra staff to use during summer. And now we're sailing towards Pearl's Island. Look what Chester found. Ooh, is this salt? Oh, that's Chester. What the hell? No! 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 This isn't happening. Moonkey Island, right next to Pearl. I'm pretty much guaranteed pirate raids while delivering items. Believe it or not, this is only the first instance of some really unfortunate world generation on this run. But even still, it's not as bad as a Monkey Island next to Crab King. Any other location I can deal with. Another nice benefit of Lights Out is that Pearl never goes back in her house. So she's always available for gifting and earning friendship points. I'm going to give her an umbrella while it's raining and then build a relic chair so she can show me how to make a sawhorse. I'm going to immediately build the sawhorse and prototype a chair for her. Then I'm planting 8 berry bushes, killing the lure plant, and drying some kelp. We can't bring her live butterflies in Lights Out, unfortunately. Not without a soul-draining amount of catcoon gifting. Wendy does actually have a new skill to make butterflies out of wings if we wanted to dig through tumbleweeds, but even those are not that much more common. Regardless, we now have 5 friendship points done, and after building the house, we'll just need 2 more for the Pearl. Pirate Raid number 1! I am not equipped to deal with them, and I don't feel like collecting trinkets, so I'm going to put a stack of twigs in my first inventory slot and unsummon Abigail. I don't know if she automatically attacks them, but I don't really want to find out. Anyways, we got super lucky. Either we lost them behind a sea stack, or it was a drive-by. Either way, I never saw them, but I'm sure I will eventually. I love how early the sus Moonrock spawns in worlds now. It feels like this whole quest line has been improved dramatically since the beginning of 2024. Lots of changes to the Crab King fight, the Moonstorms, and the Celestial Champion cost. It was a good year for players rushing lunar rifts. At the start of summer, I'm going to go fire up the archives. I only need the astral detector blueprint from here, so this will be a short trip, but I always make a point to mine one of the statues to make the astral detector before I leave. Back on the surface, I'm going to fish up the desert goggles and fight Antlion. Before I do that though, I want to mutate Abigail back to normal on a new moon. This is mainly in preparation for Crab King, but she'll be good in this form for Antlion as well. We have no need for a kiting ghost with Antlion. Abigail is completely invincible to sand spikes, so there is no way that she can take damage in this fight. I'll help out on the B-flow, and between the two of us, the fight is over in seconds. If you're patient enough to wait until summer to get the pearl, you can cook her a flower salad for an easy friendship point. I'm sorry, but I still can't get over how close this monkey island is to Pearl. I'm fairly certain that we could build a dock to connect them, but the idea of it frankly disgusts me. Back at Pearl's a few days later, we're going to finish building the house. And for the final friendship point, I'm going to clean up the trash with my winch. And the pearl is ours. The final unofficial task is to dig or just burn these berry bushes. Otherwise, they will snag a herd of bright shades when the rifts open, and I'd rather they spawn on me. It is now year 2, early autumn, and Wendy is delivering the sanctum pieces to the lunar island. We are going to chop some loon trees so we can drop a few blossoms in the cistern. I could have done this much earlier in the run, like as soon as we found Pearl. Abigail wasn't too threatened by the bosses we fought so far, but that is going to change soon. This is probably a good time to talk about Sisturn 3. This skill lets you place loon tree blossoms inside of a cistern, which will give Abigail the player tag. This effectively treats Abigail as a player, which means she takes the player damage from enemies instead of mob damage. Several boss attacks deal around double damage to mobs, but it varies between different attacks and certain bosses. But for the most part, you can think of this as a 50% damage reduction versus bosses, so it can be a useful defense skill. Not incredible enough to be totally necessary, but kind of useful. She's still far from invincible in boss fights, especially versus late game bosses, as we will soon see. But it will hopefully make her more resilient, so I don't mind the skill tree points. I just wish that Sisturn 2 was more useful, as it's required to unlock the damage reduction. Day 76, it's time for Crab King. I am socketing one of each gem, plus Pearl, plus 2 more green gems. This will mean the claws are buffed a bit, but I plan to maneuver around them anyway, so it shouldn't make much of a difference. When the boss throws up his ice wall, I will use the attack at command to try and move Abigail into the boss to position for Wendy's attack. I can also use this command during the claw phase to keep her away from the claws, which can mess her up pretty fast. Sisturn 3 does not reduce claw damage, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't reduce crab guard damage either. I made a good number of mistakes in this fight. For starters, I didn't bring any sanity food. For land fights, it's not typically a huge deal going partially insane during a boss fight, but on the sea, you start getting visits by Wavy at night. Again, not really a problem if you're on a grass boat, but because I also made the mistake of using a patched up regular boat, Wavy is going to eventually start popping these boat patches off. Abby is a bit bugged with this boss. Sometimes she'll just sit there while you wail on the boss with West damage. I experienced this on pretty much every practice fight, even when Abby was right on top of the boss. Maybe it would have been better if I riled her up for this phase, then soothed her during the claws, but honestly, it would add another thing to the long list of moves I gotta make just to get back to the boss, which means he's more likely to heal. It would be nice if Abby just behaved the way she's supposed to. And here comes Wavy popping off the patches on my boat. This is not something that you want to deal with during this fight. I sorely regret not bringing sanity food. So yeah, it's Hail Mary time. We're unsummoning Abby, we're jumping onto a grass boat, and going in for the kill. And all my driftwood is in my backpack, meaning we are soft locked onto the grass boat. Our only way to escape now is to jump ship. I pray that I will have a light source when we emerge. Fortune smiles, we still have our miner hat, but no flower. This means we need to run back home, fight a few shadow creatures with the spear. You really don't know pain until you fought shadow creatures as Wendy with the spear. And then we need to dry off. Why did I do this? I had all the cactus in the world for sanity food. Why did I not bring any to Crab King? I could have avoided all of this pain and embarrassment and, oh yeah, not wasted a bunch of time. Anyways, we got the tribute out of the water, so now we're gonna lug it over to Lunar Island and fire up the moonstorms. There's not much to say about the moonstorms other than Abigail is amazing for killing crows. You just rile her up and she takes care of them all. I'd say regular Abigail is probably better for this because of her area of effect and her fast attacks. I'm also going to mutate Abigail back to the Gestalt version for Celestial Champion. This is kind of a one-way ticket because we won't get new moons until after the moonstorms end, so hopefully she's decent for this boss. I'm doing this fight with the Beefalo since there will be plenty of moments when I don't have Abigail out. I will start with her unsummoned, and for the first couple of phases, I only plan on having her around when I'm attacking. Check that out. One attack and her HP is cut in half. I don't think the Loon Petals were active in the sisturn for this fight, but I honestly doubt it would have made much of a difference because most of this boss's attacks hit multiple times, and for some bizarre reason, the mob damage is only like 33% higher than player damage. There's probably a way to maneuver Abigail away from Wendy and avoid most of these attacks, but the truth is she's just at a major disadvantage for this fight. So for most of phase 1, I'm going to keep Abigail unsummoned. The last thing I need is for her to lose all of her levels right at the beginning of this. For phase 2, I'm trying to keep her unsummoned for the charge attack and then summoned for the kiting. I could try the escape command on her, but she'll just float back to me, and if the boss is charging, it's going to shred straight through Abigail. I also don't want to be issuing commands while it's spinning at me for reasons I'd hope are obvious. I eventually found a sweet spot towards the end of the charge where I could summon Abby back, and we would both charge in for damage. In phase 3, Abby is getting absolutely wrecked by the area of effect attacks. Fortunately, with this phase, you have more flexibility with backing off and healing whenever it's needed. I'm keeping Abigail just unsummoned for the laser baiting so that I can control where the boss shoots. I like to use the lasers to destroy the snares, and if the boss is aggroed onto Abby, then it's kind of impossible to do that. Gestalt Abby is probably the weaker option for this fight, but she also seems to last longer. Just don't be afraid to unsummon her when needed and heal her up while she's safe inside the flower. Better to take this fight slow than dash yourself upon the lasers. Abby makes the final blow, and now it's time for Lunar Rifts. Then we will be one step closer to unlocking Abigail's true power. At this point in the run, I'm pretty much done with wearing the wreath. My Enlightened Crown will provide free light and better sanity, and honestly, I haven't used any of the other potions directly on Wendy. The only other I may have considered was Vigor Mortis for moving statues quicker, but in Lights Out that means no light in the head slot, and besides, we have a Beefalo. The healing pots are much better spent on Abby. Wendy's barely taking damage as a Beefalo rider. I could use the shield potions for that exploit where we can basically starve for free, but I have so much food that it would seem downright disrespectful. So I'm probably going to spec out of that skill as soon as I can. In preparation for the Bright Shades, I'm going to plant a few tightly packed patches of grass and saplings. Bright Shades will infest player-planted crops first before going for naturally spawning plants, so this is how we can partially control where they spawn. If you want to make multiple spawning areas for them, just plant your patches 11 tiles apart so that they create separate plant herds. While we wait for the rift to open, I'm going to fight Nightmare Werepig, mainly to start the spawning timer on Scrappy, but I will also need the Dreadstone to eventually start up the cave rifts and make a plinth. I started off with a pattern of unsummoning Abigail until the boss got winded, then summoning back for dealing damage, then unsummoning again. But I quickly realized that I just needed to use the escape command before the boss started charging again, just to ensure that she wouldn't take the aggro. Then it was just a matter of keeping on the move, and as long as Abby never catches up to me, she won't take any damage from the charges. Escape basically tells Abigail to untarget whatever she's attacking, and she will also lose the aggro of any mobs currently targeting her. It's a very effective tool for getting her out of situations where she would quickly lose her HP if she tried fighting something by herself. And I consider it to be one of the most indispensable skill points on the skill tree if you plan on using Abby for boss fights. I am still going to unsummon her for the pounding phase because I'm not always moving away from the boss, and the attack is still AoE. Unfortunately, this is another fight where Sisturn 3 just doesn't affect any of the damage Abigail receives. We're still doing extra damage because of the affinity bonus, and it's a short phase before he starts charging again, so I don't mind the momentary loss in DPS. For the final phase, I'm keeping Abby out and just keeping my finger on the escape command, just in case Abby gets in the hit while I'm dodging. She still takes the occasional damage, and healing potions are important to keep on hand, but it's manageable for the most part. Because I plan on opening the cave rift and making the plinth right away, I will save 7 Dreadstone and 1 Pure Horror. I was considering using a construction amulet to make the armor, but we're gonna get Bright Shade gear soon, so it didn't seem all that necessary. Day 95, I'm gonna fight the Terror Twins. Again, we are going to benefit from the constant night to smack down the eyeball boss in one go. I'd strongly recommend loading up the Sisturn with moon petals for this fight. Otherwise, the boss is going to be smacking Abigail for 250 damage per hit. Either way, it's important to keep Abigail opposite from Wendy and make sure that the boss is targeting you during the charge. Keep plenty of healing potions on hand and back off to heal whenever needed. If you're doing this fight outside of Lights Out, then you'll have time to heal everyone up during the day. But for us, we can just back off for as long as needed. This was a sketchy fight for the Beeflo. We definitely got under 100 health, and I resorted to pan flute spam for a retinazer. This boss hits like an absolute truck, and considering the value of the drops, I think it's way more dangerous of a fight than it's currently worth, especially at this point in the run. Okay, let's go see where this rift spawned. Alright, how big is this rift? Oh no! Not in the reed trap! This is going to be so painful for farming brilliance. I could have brought the twins over to help clear, but honestly, it was like the last part of the swamp I had yet to map out, and I never would have imagined that a reed trap would be sitting perfectly inside of that little black area of the map. Between the Monkey Island right next to Pearl and now the rift smack dab in the middle of a reed trap, the game is verifiably malicious in its seemingly random choices. I have an idea for clearing it out, but it's gonna have to wait for a visit from something. Year 2 Kloss loot, we got a steel wool, which could be cool for a war saddle. Now that we can make a nightmare saddle with the cave rifts, I typically skip the war saddle, though it should be mentioned that Wendy is one character who can still hit slightly harder with the war saddle versus non-planar mobs. The deal breaker for me is the speed. War Saddle makes your Beeflo extremely slow, and the Nightmare Saddle speed is just shy of a Gossamer Saddle. So I think even for Wendy, I like to go Nightmare Saddle just to get the best of both worlds. I'm going to use this Bright Shade to thin out the Beeflo herd, again, as it has been mercilessly multiplying in the darkness of this world. First, I'm going to lure a Beeflo right next to the Bright Shade. Then I will toss a single snowball at the Bright Shade to trigger an area of effect attack, at which point the entire herd will wake up and attack the plant. They actually killed the single Bright Shade, and now Klops is growling, so it's time to go to the reed trap. As expected, Klops gets absolutely wrecked by the tentacles. But the rift is open, and you know what that means. Crystal Klops is going to take significantly reduced damage from the tentacles and will also continuously freeze them, so it'll easily kill most of the tentacles in the reed trap. The process is going to take some time though, and it's dawning on me that if we want to actually kill Klops at some point, it's gonna be tough getting it out of the reed trap without getting aggroed onto more tentacles. Fortunately, Crystal Klops does not despawn if unloaded, so I'm regrouping back at base to make the Bright Shade sword. I do want to kill it before spring starts. I just don't have enough brilliance for the armor, so we need to be very careful for this fight. Klops is already weakened, so I'm not going to need any extra repair kits. By the time I coaxed it out of the reed trap, it had taken out most of the tentacles and had barely any HP left. Anyways, it's finally dead. Totally worth making that sword. There are still a few tentacles left though, so to be safe, I'm using a weather pane to clear out the rest of the pure brilliance, and then very carefully extracting one at a time from this cursed hellhole of a set piece. At this point, I can start to make luminous wrath potions with the pure brilliance, which will add quite a bit of planar damage to Abigail's attack. Regular Abigail will do an extra 10 planar damage per hit, and Gestalt Abigail will get an extra 100 planar damage. Goes without saying, this will be very useful for fighting rift mobs. And since I'm no longer using the Wreath or the Nightshade potions, most of my Morning Glories at this point will go into healing potions and Luminous Wrath. One nice thing about these Rift Pots is that they are super potions and will not override regular potions, so we can still use healing pots without having to reapply anything. On the next new moon, I'm going to mutate Abby back to normal because for the next boss fight, we are going to want some serious crowd control. Time to hunt a Varg. I'm going to run straight in while the rift is open so that we can get this Varg converted. Abigail will take care of the hounds so I can focus on attacking the Varg, and then once it's dead and mutated, we can back off and get ready for the next part of the fight. But first we get to deal with the frog rain. I'm going to give Abby a restorative and let her kill as many frogs as possible. She'll do plenty of damage at night, so I'm not too worried about her getting hurt. She's actually fantastic for netting us a couple cool stacks of disgusting green legs. Boosta would like to remind us all that it's particularly easy to murder frogs at night because they often fall asleep, giving you a bunch of free hits. And now it's time for Possessed Varg. Abigail will deal with all of the hounds, and with her Luminous Wrath potion, she can even help to stun the Varg with her planar damage during the breath attack. Be careful doing this fight in winter or spring because the ice hounds dying can easily freeze you, and then you'll take that breath attack right to the face. Even with the Bright Shade Helm, Wendy is going to lose half of her health right away. Super sketch, but thankfully we're dealing so much damage that the fight is over before it can get out of hand. That was the second mutant boss down, meaning as soon as Berger wakes up in summer, we can fight the third mutant and get a spark arc. But we have a few other bosses to take care of before then. Next up is Frostjaw. This is a classic example of normal Abigail taking a lot of hits in a boss fight. Frostjaw is not one of the tougher bosses, but keeping Abigail alive is proving really challenging. I unsummoned her because the fight was going too quickly for me to maneuver her away. Fortunately, we have the Bright Shade Sword, which suffers much less from Wendy's damage multiplier. The hardest attack for Abigail to avoid is the charge, because we're busy trying to escape from the ice, and there's hardly any time to issue a command to her. But even if I'm super active in the fight, she will still aggro Frostjaw for the triple swipe. Wendy ended up finishing the fight on her own. I was really thankful for the Bright Shade Sword. Otherwise, without Abigail, we would have been hitting for 30-something damage the entire fight. I think Gestalt Abby would have lasted longer and taken fewer hits. I still can't believe that of all the boss fights in this run, Frostjaw would be the first one to take Abby down to 0 HP. Next up is Scrappy Werepig. I'm giving Abby a Luminous Wrath and Revenant Restorative. She actually does great in this fight, effectively dodging the vast majority of attacks. Most of the attacks she just completely avoids. Right here, Scrappy went for a charge, and Abby just shoots straight through him. The laser attack can't track her fast enough when she's constantly dodging and weaving. This fight is way easier for me than Frostjaw, which is weird because if I am to struggle with any boss, which of course I would never do, but if I were to, it'd be in the junkyard. Now give me that Elastispacer blueprint that I probably will never use. I'm also going to dig around in the junk a bit for some stale potatoes because I would never pass up an opportunity to get specific seeds in Lights Out. Carrots and potatoes are some of the few farm plants that you can get without farming tumbleweeds for generic seeds, and I would kill for some spiraled tubers. To farm in Lights Out, you're going to want to use a Starcaller staff for synthetic sunlight. Generic seeds you can get from tumbleweeds, but you can also gamble with twigs by befriending Catcoons for a chance to get any of the specific seeds. Wendy has one new potion which uses Forget-Me-Lots. I'm not using that potion on this run, but if I did want weeds in a Lights Out world, I'd just till some ground and let it fill up with weeds over time. It is now finally time for shadow pieces. Unfortunately, we do not benefit at all from Sisturn 3 here, meaning Abby is taking 165 damage from the Tier 3 Rook. I could have tried sending her away with commands right before the attack, but sacrificing a couple of swings would negate the benefit of having Vex damage to begin with. Plus, I do not want to risk being locked into a command animation while the Rook is attacking. The good news is that with a Bright Shade Sword, Bright Shade Helm, and Lunar Affinity, Wendy by herself is still doing 80 damage per swing, even without Abigail. It's not as chonky as the 100 we would get with the Vex buff, but still decent, and feels a lot safer than trying to maneuver Abby around the Rook. The goal for the day is to farm 3 Shadow Atriums, so I can use one on Fuelweaver, and the other 2 I can use for the Cave Rift Beefalo crafting stuff. For the 3rd Shadow Atrium, I'm going to try a Tier 3 Bishop, just to see if Abby is better suited. Even if I use Escape on her, the fundamental issue is that she follows me, which usually takes her directly through the path of the Bishop, so I ended up finishing all 3 Shadow Piece fights without Abigail. All in all, this was an absolutely devastating series of fights for Abby. There is likely a way to maneuver her around, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. Maybe use the Attack At command to target a spot where I'd go to dodge the attack? I mean, maybe, but since I already had Rift gear, it didn't make as big of a difference as it would have if we were trying to open the cave rifts first. But it is summer and Berger Boy is back awake, so time for the final mutant boss. Berger is another fight that was tough to keep Abby alive for. I could generally control the boss's directional attack, but the ground pound got her almost every time. I unsummoned her for most of the first part because I really wanted her planar damage for the mutant fight. For Armored Berger, I'm going to wait to bring out Abby until I have the boss stunned. She definitely helps with dealing lots of damage to the boss, but then the same issue starts to manifest again, where his ground pound is proving very difficult for Abby to avoid. If Berger aggro's onto her, I can escape her, but if he turns around and targets me with an area of effect attack, that's likely to hit Abby as well anyways. How's this for some bull right here? You saw that, right? I hit him twice with the Brightshade Staff and it didn't stun him. There's no way I'm waiting any longer for like visual confirmation of the stun. I gotta summon Abigail right away if I'm gonna use her for damage. Anyway, we're hitting for 58 with the sword, and occasionally Abigail will boost our damage, so it's fine. I will say, I do appreciate how the rifts sort of level the playing field in terms of damage modifiers. While this means that Wolfgang and Wigfrid aren't at as much of an advantage, it also means that characters like Wendy and Wes will be at less of a disadvantage. The difference between this setup, with and without Vex, is only like 9 points. By contrast, a Dark Sword versus regular mobs hits for 27 points less when Wendy doesn't have the Vex buff. So having Abigail for damage in these fights is much less of a necessity. Though if I am able to use her, then Wendy could dish out an absolutely massive payload, and this isn't even close to her DPS potential with the shadow skills. Using the drops from Nightmare Werepig, we can make a Shadowcraft plinth at the Pseudoscience Station, and now we can start in on the Shadow Rift gear as soon as we start the Rift and grab some tatters. Normally I'd hunt for the Atrium by combing the edges of the ruins with moggles and look for a spot to telepoof over, but now the Atrium Tentapillar has been made really obvious. It also seems to spawn consistently in either the guano biome or the green bush tree forest, so for me it's generally been faster just looking for the Tentapillar. And now it's finally time for Fuel Weaver. For this fight, I'm giving Abigail a Revenant Restorative and Luminous Wrath. Wendy will be fighting with a Brightshade Sword and wearing a Thulecite suit plus Brightshade Helm for protection. With a combination of lunar affinities, Brightshade set bonuses, and Vex damage, Wendy will be hitting for 100 damage per swing. Abigail, with the Wrath Potion, will be hitting at 385 damage per shot. The idea is to tank Fuel Weaver for the entire fight in order to reduce the chances of Abigail taking any damage. She may get the occasional knock if she happens to attack while the boss is swinging, and I have my cure-alls on hand in case she gets low. She's definitely helping out with damage, but the biggest loss would be in Wendy's DPS if Abigail has to back off. Now, regular Abigail can be riled on Fuel Weaver and positioned so that her area of effect deals with the Woven Shadows, but considering I have access to all the Brightshade gear, it seemed kinda goofy to not use the staff, which will also be buffed by the helm I'm wearing. I'm content to let Abby fly around and help out with damage. Wendy will still do most of the summon managing herself. This fight went insanely fast and was super fun. Gestalt Abby doesn't help out automatically as much as her normal version, but if I'm using her solely for Wendy DPS, then she will stay out of the way most of the time. And that Vex damage is all that I really need. Now it's time to start the Shadow Rifts and wait for them to open. Then we can get our OP Beefalo gear. I'm doing something on this run that I haven't done in a very long time, and that is building drying racks. Since the Polar Bear Bin became a thing, I found it much more convenient to prepare sanity dishes and keep them on hand inside the bin. Jerky has never gone inside a bin, but since we can now make Ichor preserves, I'm thinking a few rows of drying racks might provide some convenient food for when we return to base, possibly wounded or suffering from low sanity. Jerky has always been a great food choice, it's just too bad that it's not compatible with the Polar Bin. At this point, I'm ready to hop back into the Celestial Portal and respec a few of my skill points. I no longer plan to use the Wreath, and Butterfly Wings are far too rare to make good use of that skill, so that frees up 2 points. I decided to put those points into Ghostly Elixir and Gravestones. I don't know how many Forget-Me-Lots I will end up getting, but if any pop up in my farm, I can make a potion that instantly puts Abby back up to level 3. To make Ichor preserves, we need to wait for the Shadow Rift to start, at which point these Ichors will start spawning in the caves. When you deal enough damage, some of their Ichor will break off and you can collect it with empty bottles. Once you get a hold of Rift weapons and are able to actually kill them, they are a fantastic source of nightmare fuel. We are also going to fight our first batch of Ink Blights and start gathering Tatters and Pure Horror. Since we already have Brightshade gear, this will be a very easy kill. The Brightshade Staff is perfect since it's all planar damage and hits for double against shadow mobs. I'm keeping one Blight alive long enough for Wendy to mine the outcrop and grab a bit of extra Dreadstone. We're gonna need it. Last stop in the caves is to the Labyrinth so that we can make a couple of possessed atriums. Every cave rift will convert some of the labyrinth chests into ornery chests that come alive after you open them. If they die after eating an atrium, they'll drop a possessed version which is needed for a few crafting recipes at the plinth. Bearger number 2 spawns just as I get back above ground, and since it's almost the end of autumn and the rift is open, I'm gonna kill him now so that he can turn into Armored Bearger who will not go into hibernation. That way I can farm wood or kill him anytime I want. In general, this is the new way I've been keeping Bearger around, especially with characters who don't have better wood farming methods. It's more dangerous, but the flip side is that you can farm wood with Bearger any time of year. So we had a few new crafting items added to the Shadow Plinth in the Depths of Duplicity update, including 2 very impactful Beefalo items. One of these is the Beefalo saddle, which, in addition to being the best new saddle in the game, is also quite expensive, meaning it is an absolutely ideal choice for duplicating rift materials with green gems. We're going to make one with the green amulet, then deconstruct with a green staff, and this will net us 4 pure horror, 4 dreadstone, and 2 tatters. If you just wanted dreadstone, then duping walls is still better because it doesn't require a green staff. But generally, the Nightmare Saddle is the best return on investment just because of the overall amount of items it produces. Once we get enough materials, I'm going to make the Gloom Bell, which is basically a Beefalo bell with resurrection. That's right! You can now revive your Beefalo if it dies, and it only costs a player half of their max health. I'm also going to make some Ichor Preserves. This is a structure that can store 1 stack of a perishable consumable and preserve it forever. So they're like easy to use single slot stationary bundling wraps. I will be using them for jerky, but you can use them for anything consumable like glowberries, nightberries, light bulbs, crockpot dishes, or even seeds. The Nightmare Saddle gives a Beefalo 60% damage reduction, a bit of planar defense, a speed boost just under a Gossamer Saddle, and an added 18 planar damage. While there are a few instances where a character can make a War Saddle hit a little harder against regular mobs, the Nightmare Saddle is generally speaking the best saddle in the game. Before I take out Kloss this winter, I want to see how Armored Bearger shapes up against Enraged Kloss, so I'm baiting them over for a quick battle royale. It's so interesting to see how planar entity protection stacks up against a more traditional damage reduction. Kloss is double swiping for 87 damage each, while Bearger is swiping for 74. What's absolutely crazy about Kloss's damage reduction is that it appears to reduce planar damage as well as regular damage. It's absolutely nuts watching a non-planar boss go blow for blow against a mutant boss and come out on top. Anyway, here is Lunar Wendy's late game Beefalo build. With Vex damage and a Nightmare Saddle, our Ornery Beefalo is hitting for 95 damage. Now Vex only applies to regular damage, meaning an Ornery with War Saddle would hit a Vexed non-planar mob a little bit harder than a Nightmare Saddle. Even in that situation, I'm not sure that I would trade the speed of a Nightmare Saddle for an extra 6 points of damage unless I didn't need to worry at all about kiting. Loot from this class was a Malbabil and a Steel Wool. I think this is my second Steel Wool, so if I wanted to, I could make a War Saddle, but Next up is Toadstool. The combo of Brightshade Sword plus Enlightened Crown will work out to an average of 119 damage per swing. Toadstool is one boss that I try to use the crown on if at all possible, just because it's big and it doesn't really dodge any attacks. I also figured that Abigail would need lots of healing during this fight because of the boom shrooms. I actually think it might be easier for regular Abigail to avoid damage because she stays closer to Wendy and won't usually have to fly past the boss to get back to her. With Gestalt Abby, I'm not going to mess too much with the commands, just keep an eye on her health and give her a cure-all when needed. I was the most worried about the final phase because I didn't want Abby getting stomped on. But she seemed to take much less damage from the stomp than the boom shrooms, which made me wonder about something, so I tested it out, and yeah, it looks like Sisturn 3 does not affect the 100 points of damage that boom shrooms deal, so it's actually a bigger threat than the stomp. This means for Misery Toad, I'd probably go with regular Abby and maybe do the fight on a Beefalo. All in all, she did pretty good for this fight. I spent a couple of cure-alls on her, but she tended to avoid most of the attacks. And now it's time for the final boss of the run. I know I said in my last recap that I wasn't going to go for Malba anymore, but since that video, the spawning mechanics have improved considerably. Malbatross now has a 30% chance to spawn when a player hooks a bass at one of the shoals, which is a big improvement from the 5% it used to be. Its chance of spawning at a shoal has also been upped considerably. I want to say like double from what it used to be. So, since it's much less random to spawn now, I have no excuse to not get the sketch. We can aggro Malba with an Abby command, and then the fight will go very quickly. If I need to re-aggro her, I can just use Abby as a projectile, but I can also use the Brightshade Staff. With an Enlightened Crown, Brightshade Sword, and Gestalt Abby, this fight will be done in a couple of minutes. Not much to talk about other than be sure to drop an anchor on your boat and get ready to fight before you spawn her because she'll only stick around while there's fish in the shoal. That's it. All bosses are dead. As you can see from the day count, it wasn't a super fast boss run, and that was definitely by design. I was genuinely interested in the play experience of Wendy in a world with no daylight, and it was so enjoyable that I was not really in a rush to end it any sooner. Her skill tree for me is a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. I think the developers meant there to be certain abilities that were just not as good as others, but in a few regards, I think this may have been overcompensated for. For example, the Wreath introduced such a unique way for Wendy to benefit from the elixirs, but at the end of the day, most of the effects aren't all that useful. I doubt I would have used the skill at all if I didn't want to try the nostrums in a lights out run. The quality of life skills for gathering morning glories are fantastic. I'm more than happy to spend 3 points to make that minigame less tedious and repetitive. Also, thank you so much for the potion basket, another great addition that makes complete sense. The sisturn skills I can't really vouch for at the moment, unfortunately. Sisturn 1 is a great QOL, but personally I wouldn't mind petals lasting even longer than they currently do. I feel like I missed the damage reduction skill because those loon petals spoiled faster than I thought they would. Sisturn 2 is a straight up filler skill. They could probably stand to remove it completely, as people are getting it mainly to unlock Sisturn 3. Now, Sisturn 3 I could probably do an entire video on, and I know it's been the most controversial part of Wendy's skill tree. Personally, I don't think the player tag provided the most thorough treatment to the issue of Abigail's survivability, simply because it doesn't apply consistently. There are a number of bosses and mini-bosses that don't deal extra damage to mobs, so the skill is really specific to a handful of boss fights, and I would basically have to memorize which fights those are in order to make use of the skill for them. Considering Abby now has universally nerfed healing from potions while this skill is in effect, I don't really understand why the damage reduction couldn't have been similarly more universal. Outside of a few very specific fights, it just wasn't super helpful in its current form. Hopefully its benefit gets expanded somewhat before the end of the beta, because Abigail still melts like a stick of butter versus certain bosses like shadow pieces. As for Gestalt Abby, I had a similar mixed experience, and perhaps it was a mistake of personal expectations. I thought that we were getting a version of Abigail that had advantages in some scenarios, but could still be used like regular Abigail with a bit of extra management. That, as it turned out, was never the intent. Gestalt Abby was not supposed to be an equal to the regular form, and certainly not as versatile. In practice, she was definitely more resilient in a handful of boss fights, especially the single target bosses. In everyday situations versus multiple mobs, and in boss fights with adds, she is simply not as good as regular Abby. At one point in the beta, she gained area of effect line damage when you issued an attack at command, which I thought made her much better of a choice, but apparently that was a bug that's since gotten fixed. I personally consider AoE damage to be one of the most useful fighting skills you could have, and I absolutely hate having to sacrifice that in exchange for a very specialized form of survivability. I'd say the best additions to the skill tree were the new commands, which gave us a lot of control over Abby's movements. To be able to position her at any moment with the attack at command is invaluable when setting specific targets or just moving her to a safe place. The escape command is a great way of de-aggroing mobs and getting Abby to stop attacking something that will get her hurt. The affinity skills are pretty nice for making Wendy compatible with Rift content, but in general, they seem to favor the shadow side. The Vex potion and extra damage boost from murdering creatures seems to make for a greater damage output than anything the lunar side has to offer. I wouldn't have minded this if Gestalt Abby hadn't turned out to be generally less versatile. Next Wendy run, I'm definitely going for the shadow side. Safety be damned when you can get fights done faster. All in all, I think Wendy's skill tree is mostly what it needs to be, even if it's not everything that I had hoped it would be. More control over Abby, and compatibility with Rift content. At the end of the day, those were my big ones. But gravestones were a nice added benefit. Abigail is still not great in every fight, and that is clearly by design. If Clay truly intended to make her more universally resilient in the late game, they would have done it. Instead, they have taken great precautions with ensuring that Abigail does not carry fights for Wendy, and at the end of the day, I gotta respect that. But you know, I'm far from a Wendy main. If you do take her for a spin in the beta, feel free to hop on the Discord and let us know what you think. We've got a whole channel dedicated to discussion of the beta. That's it for the run. Hope Hope you enjoyed the recap video, and thanks so much for watching. See you next time.